I was born in Chicago, June 17th, 1904, raised in Wilmette, which is a suburb of Chicago up to the north. Went to New Trier High School, first public schools in Wilmette, New Trier High School, from which I was asked to leave in my senior year for smoking on campus. And there might be a little anecdote there. I was president of the dramatic club, and as such I had keys to the auditorium. And on a overcast, dismal, chilly, typical Midwest autumn day, after lunch, I wanted a cigarette. I smoked. We weren't supposed to smoke on the campus, weren't allowed to. So I went over to the auditorium, let myself in, went downstairs, and was confronted by a corridor, a long corridor, from which was coming a very pleasant, warm draft. I followed it to its source, which was a room off to one side with a window up at ground level and a huge wheel encased in an open-work iron protective device. And the wheel spinning very rapidly. I lit my cigarette and blew a puff in, expecting it to disappear, and it didn't. It was kind of shaved off. It was fascinating. I blew another one and another one. And presently standing in the doorway was the professor who had caught me at everything for the past 4 years. And he said, "What are you doing, Ralph?" I said, "Smoking a cigarette." He said, "You know the rules. Will you go over and talk to the principal, or shall I?" And I said, "I'll go over." I had been there before. I went up through the auditorium, which was reeking of cigarette smoke. This was the ventilator I'd been blowing my cigarette smoke into. The principal said, "This is one too many. You better take your books and go home." So just before graduation time, in the spring of my 4th year, I was kicked out of high school. But a couple of weeks later, I got my first professional job. My father was an advertising man, a struggling advertising man, wound up with his own company eventually with a partner. They had Buick at one time, which was his biggest account, but never a great success, a hard worker. An interesting fellow, I guess well-liked in his circles in Chicago. Didn't want me to be an actor when I had announced that I was going to be. He said, "You'll never get a job doing anything else if you fail as an actor. You'll never get into good clubs." So I defied him. My mother was Canadian. Born in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm a lovely, lovely, loving mother. All through high school, I was fascinated with acting before I decided to become an actor, which later developed in high school, and becoming president of the dramatic club. I had read many biographies of actors and knew pretty well all the old-time actors. Before I left school, and for a little while afterward, I left high school, I had organized a little theater, which could have been one of the very first in the United States, called the North Shore Players, which consisted of some of my friends from New Trier High School and Northwestern University people interested in the theater. We also had, in conjunction with it, a symphony orchestra of about 30 pieces, mostly Northwestern University music students. We did very well up and down the North Shore for a little while. But eventually, after I had been requested to leave New Trier High School, a few weeks later, I got my first job on the Chautauqua circuit. A lot of people are not familiar with Chautauqua, actually it still exists as a group of summer kind of bungalows on Chautauqua Lake, just I think south of Rochester, New York. It began, or it still is, I guess, an inspiration and an organization sponsored by and operated by the Methodist Church. Originally, it was altogether religious activity, speeches and meetings and so on. And actually, William Jennings Bryan, I think, got his start on the Chautauqua circuit, which the circuit began after their success at their summer gatherings, and eventually took on entertainment on traveling companies appearing under a tent. I did got a job. Well, I heard about the Chautauqua and heard that they had entertainment and telephoned from Wilmette, a fellow in Chicago whom I heard produced plays on the Chautauqua circuit. And I telephoned him. His name was Warner Wales. And to my great surprise, I got him on the phone. He picked up the phone. And I said, Mr. Wales, he said, yes. He said, I said, this is Ralph Bellamy. He had absolutely no remote idea of who I was or what I was. He said, yes. And I said, I wonder if you have anything for me this season. I had read this in some of the biographies. And he said, well, let's see, what do you do? Well, this took me by surprise. And I said, ingenues, not knowing what that meant. He said, you mean juveniles, don't you? I said, yes, of course, not knowing really what that meant either. I got a job as the leading man's father in Harold Bell Wright's The Shepherd of the Hills. I turned 18 on the job. Used more makeup and crepe hair and spirit gum than I've used ever since in the 69 one-night stands under tent playing The Shepherd of the Hills. That was the beginning of my first paid job. I think it was $40 a week, which was not bad. Had to put myself up with that, but boarding houses were, I think, $1 a night, and meals were $1 a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that wasn't too bad. After the experience with The Shepherd of the Hills, Harold Bell Wright's play, I was convinced that the theater was my career. I got a couple of jobs as stage manager. Well, one, stage manager, playing odd parts, whatever was left over after the rest of the casting had been done, in a stock company, first in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, might be interesting to go into the stock company. A lot of people confuse the old stock company with summer stock as it is today. Actually, there is nothing comparable about them. The stock company was a resident company of 11 people: leading man, leading woman, second businessman, second businesswoman, juvenile, ingenue, character man, character woman, comedian, stage manager, director, scene painter. We built and painted all the scenery. The local crew built the scenery, and the scenic artist was with the company, painted it. And you did a different play each week. While you were playing one at night, you had been rehearsing next week's play all day long. And 7 nights and three matinees, Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday, no days off. Every city of 50,000 or over in the United States had a local resident stock company. And most of the people in the legitimate theater in those days and even before, came from stock companies. I became a member of Actors Equity in 1922 when I was with the Chautauqua tour. Cost me $9, I'll remember, and I didn't have it. The company manager paid it for me. That was the membership for a year, $9. Every company, Equity, Equity had achieved that any professional company would be bound by or would adhere to negotiated rules and laws and regulations resulting from the negotiations with the producers. And we were one of those companies. Going back to the biographies I had read about the older actors and actually going back into the almost mid to late 1800s, actors were not held in very high regard. There were a great many of them drunks, and I use that word advisedly. That's what they were. And socially not acceptable, outcast, as a matter of fact. I can even remember signs when I was on the road later on in boarding houses saying rooms, no dogs or actors. Believe it or not, I saw that. So that my chosen profession, though I had chosen it, gave me pause every now and then, but not for long. I had spent many years, 6 or 7 continuous years of playing in stock companies around the country, and had my own company, stock company, for a while in Des Moines, Iowa, and then in Nashville, Tennessee, and then in Evanston. In each case, going to town and staying for a period of time, different play each week. Then in New York, which every actor aspired to at that time, Broadway, I went broke, and really, literally, desperately broke. Well, just 2 examples. There was one place when I was down to change, just a little change in the pocket. I could get a bowl of soup, I think it was pea soup, and a quarter loaf of a round loaf of rye bread for 15 cents, which was my one meal a day. Then I got down to finally living in a rooming house, and it was a very inexpensive one. Raw peanuts in the shell, and I figured that if I ate the shells with the peanuts and drank some water, it would swell it to the feeling, at least, of having had a good meal. And that lasted for quite a while. I remember, too, during that time, I was desperate for some kind of food other than these raw peanuts. Early one morning, I went out, and I was about to take from the doorstep, which was practically on the sidewalk of a house, a bottle of milk. Milk was in bottles in those days. And I leaned over to take it, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone approaching, and it was a cop in full uniform. And I smiled, and he smiled, and I left the milk. I was living now down in Greenwich Village, a basement apartment in Greenwich Village, and Arthur Hopkins, Chamberlain Brown, who was one of the big agents at that time, called me and said, get yourself up here as fast as you can to see Arthur Hopkins about a play. Arthur Hopkins was one of the brilliant and successful Broadway producers. Anyway, I went to see him. It was in August, I remember, and very, very hot. And we talked about the part, the play, which was Roadside. He said at one point, you would have to pick up a man with one hand. You think you could get away with this? And I said, I'll do it. I would have lifted 5 men with one hand. I was that desperate. So I went back to my flat, my apartment, whatever you call it, my room down in Greenwich Village, and I put on this was the middle of August, a sweater with a vest over it and my jacket to appear to be more bulky, muscular than I actually was. I went back, read the part, and got it. That was my really first break, from which the play Roadside lasted only 2 weeks, but I had a contract offer from every studio, and finally came out. I was on my way to Hollywood under contract to Joe Skank, incidentally. And I stopped in Chicago to say hello to Frank Morgan, an old friend from New York, who really laced me down for going to Hollywood with respect to the legitimate theater actors' attitude toward Hollywood. Really let me have it. But he did come down to the train to see me off and called me a prostitute, a whore, and everything, and wasting good talent by going to Hollywood. This was in the old tradition of the legitimate theater actor and his attitude toward picture actors, silent picture actors. Anyway, about, 6 to 8 months later, I got a phone call in Hollywood, and who was on the other end of the phone but Frank Morgan, who had just come to Hollywood to be in pictures. So there were 2 of us whores now in Hollywood. My first impression of Hollywood was the following. It was in December of 1930, but it was hot. And I remember going out onto Hollywood Boulevard, and there was the people were lined up on the sidewalks waiting for a parade, which eventually showed up. It was led by 4 stuffed reindeer on floats, behind which was the sleigh and another float with Santa Claus, and behind that another float with a wind machine and a man throwing confetti into it, going up Hollywood Boulevard. That was my first impression, really, of, what shall I say, active Hollywood Boulevard. My first picture was The Secret Six. The cast consisted of Clark Gable, first picture at MGM, Jean Harlow, Wallace Beery, Louis Stone, Marjorie Rambeau, Johnny Mac Brown, and several others, but all pretty well known. I remember it was directed by George Hill, not the current George Hill, but another director of the same name. I remember the first day I came on the set, we had a 4-page scene to do. And I came on the set without the script, I knew it, and everybody else had the script in their hands, and they said, he knows it. All silent picture people, most. They were amazed that I knew what we were going to do that day. Well, at that time, let's see, before we leave that, there's a little anecdote that might be amusing. During the shooting of this, I was having dinner one night alone in a restaurant on Hollywood Boulevard, which was owned by Charlie Chaplin. He wasn't there, but he owned the place. And Clark Gable came in, and he said, "You alone? Can I sit with you?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "What do you think of this place?" I said, "I don't know yet. I just got here a while ago." And I'm staying pretty close to shooting experience. And he said, I just got $15,000 for playing a heavy in a Bill Boyd Western. $15,000. No actor is worth that. He said, I've got myself a room in the Castle Argyle, which was a semi-rooming house at the head of Vine Street in Hollywood. He said, I've got a second-hand Ford, and I'm not buying anything you can't put on the Chief because this isn't going to last. The Chief, of course, being the Santa Fe train going back to New York. I quickly learned that there is a difference, a marked difference in technique, in behavior before the camera as opposed to appearing on the stage. On the stage, you are playing to the last row in the gallery. In pictures, you're appealing to someone across the desk from you. It's a more intimate, quiet relationship with the audience than the stage. The gestures are big and broad. In pictures, a gesture like this would go off camera, as I'm sure this does right now. The same gesture on the screen would be this. You've got to keep yourself on the screen at all times. It's a more intimate, much more intimate medium than the stage. There weren't any working conditions when I came out here, really. There was no organization. The actors had not got together. I think the producers had. As I recall, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in those days was a company union, which was designed to keep things quiet. This is my impression. I'm pretty sure my memory's right on that. You worked any kind of hours, any number of days. Your contract was whatever you could get. Your agent could get for you, which it remains. But there were no hours specified. Well, specified, there had been no negotiations. There just were no working conditions. I must say it was pleasant enough, and as a result of the introduction of sound and the business finding that the silent picture actors, in the main, could not handle reading lines, learning lines and reading them, and the business having gone to the nearest source, the theater, to get people, we all knew each other, or pretty much so. A great many of us came out at the same time from Broadway, having known each other back there, so that there was kind of the feeling of almost a country village, literally. It became obvious to a great many of us that we needed some kind of agreement with management to organize the conditions of work. And it was among most of the people who had come out from New York. And this grew and grew over a period of time into what finally became the Screen Actors Guild. It was a long, long, hard battle, too. There were many meetings. There were a concerted effort to persuade other actors to rouse them to a pitch of agreeing with us that we needed some kind of organization with strength that could meet with management, management would meet with. It took us some time. As I remember, it was at least a couple of years of just talking, meeting in people's houses, and on the set, talking to people, rousing people, getting people to agree to join together. There was not a great response to those of us who had undertaken to rouse the actors to some kind of action. There were many people who didn't see it our way, who didn't want to go along with it. I can remember at one meeting, actually at Freddie March's house, a group of us had roused each other. We had all spoken, said something, and raised our arms and doubled our fists and so on. And we took a vote. And everybody had a hand up except one fellow. His name was Reginald Owen. And he and Frank Morgan were good friends. He was a good friend of mine, too. And Frank said, "Reggie, you don't go along with this?" And I remember Reggie saying, "I am doing very well, and Mr. Mayor has been very good to me in my contract at MGM, and I'm just not ready to defy him." And Frank, using four-letter words, "You crazy son of a bitch, and you don't know," so on. But this was in one meeting, and I guess the rest of us laughed because it was so... Frank was so heated and so overcome that it became a kind of a scene. And we were at Freddie March's house. At that time, he had rented Cecil B. DeMille's house, which was at the corner of Sunset and Vermont, roughly up on the hill. There's a great hill there. An enormous, elaborate house with a huge living room, an enormous chandelier in the center. We were all gathered. We had decided that we were going to go, that we'd had enough meetings, and there were enough people who had agreed to go along, and we were ready to announce that we had formed the Screen Actors Guild. The motivation back of all this effort at organization and bringing other actors to the point of agreeing to join in an effort to organize and meet with the producers was a general feeling of the good of those actors who could not negotiate for themselves. Obviously, the high-paid people could get, to some degree, some stipulations in their contract about working conditions and so on, other than salary, but certainly not everybody. And I think there was a feeling, I know there was a feeling of the good of actors in general, particularly those who could not negotiate for themselves, and even whose agents could not get very far. There had to be some protection because it was brutal working conditions, particularly the hours. And of course, at that time, the lights were quite different from what they are today. They were enormously hot lights. And the lesser people not having stand-ins, there weren't very many stand-ins, if any, in some studios, standing in day after day, hour after hour for weeks. That's only a part of it. And the formation of Screen Actors Guild, I was going to say alerted. That's not the word. Finally woke up the other groups, the directors, the writers, the cameramen, all the various other groups to what could be obtained in their areas. I'm pretty sure we were the first, and that we caused their awareness. The McCarthy period, the communist in quotes, period, was one of the darkest times in the history of the moving picture business. People's personal animosities were roused. People were accused of being communist, whether they were or not, sometimes because of personal animosity, which I think came out pretty clearly in some cases where it was uncalled for. The whole industry was roused. The Hollywood 10 are well known. It ruined some careers. Some of those 10 who were ostracized by the studios, out of jobs, left town, went to Europe in some cases, Mexico in a couple of cases, and in some cases stayed here and continued to write under assumed names, just managing to get by. Not to, in every case, not to deny being communists, which many of them refused to do publicly on a basis of not certainly not lying, but being intruded upon in their personal lives, which in many of their cases figured was not the public's concern, and had the nerve to stand up for what they figured was their right to a public life and to live it as they saw fit. I think probably of the Hollywood 10 and some other people in the business too, probably some people favored communism, but it was not doing anything to the moving picture business. There might have been an effort which was directed or encouraged from the outside by communists to get in, move in, and take over, which had happened in other cases and even in other countries before. But I don't know. But the awful part of it to me was the massacring of people. Strange things happened. I was president of Actors Equity through part of this, and I came out here to do a job, and I was at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and Ward Bond, an old friend, came to see me, and he said, do you know you're the president of a communist organization? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And he said, listen to this. And he pulled out a notebook and read me a list of names of people whom he said were communists. And I said, well, I don't know about all of them, Ward, but I know some of them, and I would certainly differ with you. And anyway, we have not got a communist organization, an Actors Equity Association. Anyway, it was a pretty frightening encounter. I had known Ward, worked with him as an actor, respected him, but he, like others, writers and a couple of directors, had felt it so strongly they had made it a major issue with them to publicly denounce fellow actors, writers, directors, and so on. And even before Senate investigating committees. I remember Jim Cagney, who was my oldest friend, was accused of being a communist. And the first and I think maybe only time he ever took an airplane, he went to Washington to appear before the Dies Committee to deny it and to open himself to any kind of investigation. He, of course, was found, shall I say, innocent? I don't know. That's not the word, but that he was not concerned with this awful blanket that had hit the industry. There were, I think I've said this though, there were careers ruined. There were people ruined, human beings ruined with the destruction that was so viciously applied to them. The blacklist, of course, was the list which came largely from appearances before congressional committees, actors talking against actors, directors against directors, and so on. And these accusations within the industry, and actually, I know it got to the point that some producers, some studios were wary of, this is probably the gray list, of employing people who had been accused partially or questionably or whatever. That's probably the gray list. But the blacklist was a definite positive thing. They were people who did not work and could not get a job under their own names. The Screen Actors Guild, of course, was roused emotionally by this activity. There were people on the board, however, who, a few, not many, who went along with the movement against those who were who were questionable in their relationship with communism. Not many, but there were some. However, the Screen Actors Guild, in general, did what it could, as I remember, and I'm sure I'm right, to combat the movement against individuals and the people who were creating lists of possible communist members. I have had some feelings about some of the board members over the years of the Screen Actors Guild and their political persuasions. I happen to be a fairly, I hope, liberal fellow myself. Some of them members of the board, not a great many, but a few over the years, have tended to be a little more to the right than I would be happy with. However, I must say that the Screen Actors Guild has done a remarkable and continuing excellent job over the years in taking care of the members. And by that, I mean, aside from salary and working conditions, I'm speaking of health and welfare. They've done a remarkable job, to be commended. The TV people never recovered costs with the first showing of a picture or a series or whatever. They depended on reruns, and the actors wanted to be paid for reruns. Actually, They made the picture, they did the acting, and it was their names or their performances that made the product popular and wanted. It took a long, long time to arrive at the concept of rerun payment, and it's still continuing, and it will go on. So in 1959, at Negotiation Screen Actors Guild, at that time, our president was the ex-president of the United States, Ronald Reagan. In my opinion, he gave away in negotiations part of the rights of actors in trying to arrive at an agreement. Ronald Reagan, our president, gave away residuals before 1960. Now, this affected a lot of people at that time. At this time, there are not so many left. There have been residuals since 1960. And the people who've been active since 1960 are doing all right. But the people who, before 1960, had done most of their work are still out in left field. And this I feel quite strongly about and bitterly about. I'm aware that Jack Dales has tried to defend this action. But I think on the basis of the fact that to achieve some other things in the negotiations, they had to relinquish residuals before 1960. I have to say, Jack was a good friend of Ronnie Reagan's, and I think even though Reagan began as a Democrat and a liberal one, he became diametrically opposite, a hardcore right-wing fellow. At the time that he and Jack were friends, I think Jack went along with him. I know Ronnie, not well, but I had to deal with him. When I was president of Actors Equity for 12 years, part of that time he was president of the Screen Actors Guild. We had to deal with each other. And I never got very far with him. It was usually, I'll let you know, and that was that. It stopped there. Normally, in negotiations, in my experience, the first day or two, or maybe even more, are consumed with calling each other names, each side, which is a waste of time, and they're always too long and drawn out. I like to say, when you sit down to negotiate, here we are and there you are. Someplace in here is the point at which we are going to agree. It's there now. The point is, how are we going to find it? How are we going to get to it? Never mind about personalities, never mind about right or wrong. Sure, argue with that if you want to, but get to the right thing to do, the right thing to find that is good for both of us, you as well as us. I think the negotiations should have and could have come to an agreement, certainly better than stopping at 1960, which would have included previous films before 1960. Not having been a part of the negotiating committee, perhaps I am emotionally or too emotionally involved with what finally happened, the 1960 cutoff. But that's what negotiations are about. And this, to me, was not in the spirit of the Screen Actors Guild, which, as I've said before, has always been directed toward the general welfare of the membership that can't negotiate for itself. It's the little people that got hurt in that 1960 cutoff. The people who depend to a large extent on residuals were cut off completely. And yes, I think that there could have been some way to get to something better than stopping the payment of residuals before 1960. Jim Cagney was unknown by people who are not his close friends. Jim Cagney had a great social sense. He was interested in the little fellow, the struggling fellow, not only in the union but out of the union, but instigated, I think started a general sort of philosophy that has persisted since his presidency. I think Bob Montgomery came shortly after him. I don't remember exactly the sequence, but this was another fellow, the same kind of background and attitude and guts, really, to face the situation and see it through. Walter Pidgeon was a much gentler kind of fellow, but great public spirit and great feeling for the underling, what shall I say, lesser endowed member of the union, watching out for their welfare. And welfare and health are the great aspects of the Screen Actors Guild that have persisted and grown. I think it's a union among unions with respect to its feeling of care for its members. I have the highest regard for that aspect of the union and the people who have, over the years, who have sustained it, maintained it, and increased it. We've had awful battles. We've had some strikes. I've walked around a lot of the studios with a picket in this town, and so have a lot of other people. But it's always been in a good, proper, right cause, and we've prevailed. We've always prevailed. Oh, you're putting me on a spot. You're really putting me on a spot. I hated to see, I'm going to have to really go off the deep end here, an ex-president of ours go about the country recently preaching right to work, which is totally, diametrically opposed to anything that the Guild has anything to do with. It's against unions. But there is that. We have had some pretty right-wing people at the head of it at times, but so is every other organization. The main point is that the Screen Actors Guild has come through it all. I think it's one of the great unions in our country. When television came in, it's a strange thing in a way. every time something new happens, the actors' unions talk about getting together. I was, I guess, one of the first, if not the first, advocate of merger when I was president of Actors Equity Association. We talked about merger at that time with not only the Screen Actors Guild, but two or three other actors' guilds. Then when television came in, we talked about merging with AFTRA before it was AFTRA. I'm convinced that sooner or later, we'll all be one union. It makes sense. It's, to me, I know there are people who don't like it, who are opposed to it. There aren't very many. I believe, I am positive that the members want a merger. It's the executives who are holding it up. And actually I said this one time in New York when Jack Dales and Ken Thompson and a couple of others came on from the coast. We were all having dinner together at my hotel. And I was talking merger, and I said, you fellas are scared. You're scared of this because you're scared you'll lose your jobs. You won't. Your jobs will be just as important. You'll just be under one roof. We'll have far fewer managerial groups operating the various actors' activities. Nothing will be affected with respect to you personally, you fellas, your salaries, your positions. It's just that we'll be closer and we'll be one organization, one set of dues, which will make it easy on the actors themselves. Well, I don't know. I am convinced eventually, I don't know how long it'll take, we will be one union. An actor's pursuit of his career is a tentative, upsetting, sometimes discouraging experience. It probably goes back to, certainly not the people in the upper brackets. I'm not considering them. It's the being out of work and sitting next to the telephone and waiting for somebody to call with a job and the call not coming. This kind of actor. A lot of them, it's easy to say, but a lot of them shouldn't have become actors. A lot of them are not actors. Particularly some of them who have gone to dramatic school. I don't believe anyone can teach you to act. You either can or you can't. Everybody needs direction, needs assistance, needs advice, needs practice. The greatest actors in the world need direction, but that's not being taught to act. I repeat, you either can or you can't, and this is a matter of luck. You're born with it or you're born without it. Those who are not too successful, and I can understand it completely and deeply, are devoted to the career of acting. They want to be actors. They'd like to be stars. They'd like to be up in the big brackets. And they'd like to get the part they're sure would put them there. It can't happen in most cases. The numbers of the membership in the actors' unions are staggering. There aren't enough jobs to include most of the membership. The jobs include those who have names that attract customers at the box office, or who have careers of experience and who are known around the world. And the poor little guys are left out. They're unfortunate. Even for the people in the upper brackets, there is an uncertainty about the security of your professional standing. I don't say that anybody in the upper brackets sits by the telephone waiting for it to ring, but there are long periods of inactivity that can make you wonder, am I still desirable in the business? Am I still, there are a couple of parts that I could have played that I didn't get or was not considered for or whatever. All of this is a part of the, what shall I say, most uncertain kind of career that one could choose. I would never think of retiring. Retiring, to me, and people who have retired, it seems to me, are just waiting to die. There's so much to do in life. There are books to be read. There are places to go. There are things to do. There are ways to express yourself. I do a little painting. I do very little writing. But something, you must have something to occupy you. Me too. If you don't, you stagnate. And you can see it in those who have chosen to let everything go and retire or to live on whatever benefits there are for them. It's too bad. I hate to see it. You are witnessing the disintegration, to me, in someone who's retired. I wouldn't think of it. And there's always a surprise of some kind, too. A trip, a voyage, a discovery, some kind of discovery, from the books you read, from the people you meet. As long as your mind and your body is kept active. I keep my body active, too. I don't know what brought this to mind, but not only will I not retire, but I will try to be ready for whatever comes along. I do some setting up exercises every morning and try to keep myself in physical shape. Getting close to, not too close, but fairly close to a large number of years. I've got 85 coming up in June next month. I hesitate to use the cliche, it's not the next one, but the one that's maybe coming along, the one I hope for. I've done 105 feature pictures. There isn't one that I would point to. I had a lot of fun doing many of them, and they turned out to be good pictures, but I wouldn't say that they were the epitome of what I had in mind as a career as an actor. I'm still hoping for the one. I'm not alone on this, I'm sure. Most actors will say pretty much the same thing.